"You can't handle this, honey. Go wait in the car." Sergeant Tyler Quist said it with a rifle in his left hand, and his right arm braced across the cage door, and he said it loudly, because there was a specialist behind him at the workbench, and a loud sentence is worth more than a quiet one when somebody is watching. The arms room at Building 421 smelled of solvent and cold concrete. Saturday, the 12th of April, 0840 hours. The corridor ran 40 feet from the exterior door to the loading bay at the far end, and it was lit by 4 fluorescent fixtures, one of which had been flickering since February, and had a work order against it that nobody had closed. The woman in the doorway did not move. She was 69 years old. She wore a plain red jacket, zipped to the sternum, and a small unmarked pin on the left lapel. Her hair was white and cut to the collar. She held a folded sheet of paper in her left hand, and nothing in her right, and her right hand hung open and loose at her side. "I'm the witness for the 1140 transfer," she said. "There's no transfer." Quist set the rifle down on the bench without looking at it, which is a thing armorers do not do, and which he did because he was performing. "There's a monthly inventory. Those are 2 different things, ma'am." Specialist Ronan Fitch laughed. He was 21, 6 months in the unit, and he laughed because his sergeant had made a joke, and that is what a specialist does at 0840 on a Saturday. 1140, the woman said again. "Rack 4. "Okay." Quist leaned into the doorframe. His arm stayed where it was. "So here's the thing. This is an arms room. It's a restricted area, which means the people who come through this door are on a list, and I have the list, and you're not on it. Now, I don't know who told you to come down here, or whether you got turned around looking for the Family Services building, but I'm telling you nicely one time. Go wait in the car." She looked past him. That was the first thing in the room that was wrong, and Fitch was the only one who caught it, and he did not know what he was catching. She did not look at Quist's face. She did not look at his arm across the door. She looked past his shoulder into the cage, and her eyes moved left to right along the racks and short, flat steps, the way a person reads a line of print, and then they came back and went along the second row, and then the third. She was counting. "Ma'am." Quist snapped his fingers once in front of her, at chin height. "Eyes here." She brought her eyes to him without hurrying. "There are 182 weapons in this room," she said. "That's a lot of accountability for one sergeant on a weekend." The corridor got quieter by a degree. "That number's on the placard," Quist said. It was. There was a laminated placard screwed to the wall beside the door, and it carried the authorized quantity, and it did say 182. He was correct that the number was on the placard. He was also standing directly in front of the placard, and had been for the entire conversation, and his shoulder covered it completely. Master Sergeant Ingrid Salcedo came around the corner from the orderly room at that moment, with a clipboard and a cup of coffee. 41 years old, staff duty NCO for the weekend, 11 years in the unit, and 2 on this installation. She saw an arm across a door frame and an old woman in a red jacket standing in front of it, and she slowed. She did not stop. Stopping would have been a decision, and she had not made one yet. "Sergeant," she said, without breaking stride. "Master Sergeant." "Everything all right down here?" "Lost visitor," Quist said. "I'm handling it." Salcedo went 4 more steps, and then she did stop, and she turned around, and she looked at the old woman properly for the first time. The woman was standing with her back against the solid section of wall between the cage door and the fire extinguisher. From that position, she could see the exterior door at one end of the corridor and the loading bay roll up at the other, and there was nothing behind her but painted cinder block. Nobody stands there. People stand in the middle of a corridor, or they stand against the door they came in through, or they drift toward whatever is interesting. Nobody puts a wall at their back and both exits in their field of view without thinking about it, and nobody who is thinking about it does it that smoothly. Salcedo had been in the Army for 19 years. She had seen perhaps 4 people stand like that in her life, and every one of them had come from somewhere she had not been cleared to ask about. "Ma'am," Salcedo said, "can I help you?" "I'm the witness for the 1140 transfer," the old woman said. "Rack 4, position 11. I have the authority number if you want it." "She doesn't have a badge," Quist said. "I already checked. There's no visitor badge. There's no escort. And she's not on the access roster." "That's true," the old woman said. Quist opened his hands, palms up to the corridor at large, as though a point had been proved on his behalf by the opposition. "There you go. None of that is the same as not having access, Sergeant." She said it without any edge at all. She might have been reading a weather report. "Those are 4 different systems. You checked one of them." The flickering fluorescent buzzed twice and steadied. Quist's arm was still across the door. It had been across the door for 3 minutes and 11 seconds by the clock on the corridor wall, and his forearm had begun to ache, and he could not lower it now without it meaning something. He did not lower it. Behind him, at the workbench, Specialist Fitch had stopped smiling and had picked up a cleaning rod he did not need. Quist decided to end it with arithmetic. "All right," he said. "You want to tell me about accountability. Rack 4, how many in Rack 4? It was a trap, and it was not a good one. The cage door was closed. The mesh was painted steel, 1/4-inch diamond, and Rack 4 sat 11 feet back on the left-hand wall, behind 2 other racks. From the corridor, you could see that weapons existed in there. You could not count them." 14, she said. Quist waited for her to hedge. People hedge. They say about 14, or they say, "I think 14," or they laugh and say she was only guessing. She did not do any of that. She said 14, and then she stopped talking, which is a thing very few people can do. "Fitch," Quist said. Fitch went and looked. He came back with the count sheet on the clipboard, and he held it against his chest for a second before he read it. And when he read it quietly. 14, Sergeant." "Lucky guess. One of them is not a service weapon," the old woman said. The corridor stopped again. "Position 11, she said. "It's shorter than the ones on either side of it by about 3 inches at the muzzle, and it sits lower in the cradle, because the cradle was cut for a different profile, and somebody shimmed it with a folded cleaning patch instead of ordering the right bracket. You can see the shim from here if you know to look at the bottom of the rack instead of the top." Nobody said anything. "That's a 9-year hand receipt," she said. "It's been in that position since 2017. If it had ever been signed out, the shim would have been thrown away by whoever put it back." Salcedo set her coffee down on the corridor windowsill. "Ma'am," she said, "what's your name?" "Rask." "First name?" "Wilhelmina. People say Billy." "Rask." Salcedo said it once, to hear it. "And you're here for a transfer at 1140. Rack 4, position 11, to a service museum. The transfer authority requires a witness from the program of record. That's me. The paperwork went to this installation 11 days ago." She lifted the folded sheet slightly in her left hand, and then lowered it again, without offering it. "I'd rather not hand this to anybody until somebody senior is standing here, because once I hand it over, it's out of my custody, and I've had a long career of not doing that." Quist made a sound through his nose. "You know what I think," he said. "I think somebody in your family used to work here, and I think you found a piece of paper in a drawer, and I think you drove out here on a Saturday because it's Saturday. And that's not a crime, ma'am, but it's also not a transfer authority." Billy Rask turned her head very slightly and looked at the key control box on the wall. It was a gray steel cabinet, hinged, with 2 locks and a log sheet clipped to the inside of the door, and the door was standing open because Quist had drawn the cage key at 0630 and had not closed it. "Tuesday," she said. "What?" "The 14th of the month. Your key control log has one signature on the 14th. It needs two. Issuer and receiver. Both. Every draw and every return. There's one. She looked back at Quist. That's not a big finding, Sergeant. That's the kind of thing that gets fixed on the spot and never gets written down. But it does get written down if somebody starts writing things down about this building today. Fitch looked at the box. Then he looked at Quist. Is that true? Salcedo asked. I'd have to check, Quist said. That's a yes, said Salcedo, and she did not say it unkindly, and it landed on Quist like a hand on the back of the neck. He had been an armorer for 2 years. He was good at it mostly. He had a system for the monthly inventory that was faster than the system the last sergeant had used, and he had never lost a weapon, never lost a bolt, never lost a magazine. And he was 24 years old, and there was a specialist behind him, and a master sergeant beside him, and an old woman in a red jacket in front of him, who had just read his key control log from 9 feet away through an open cabinet door. There was one correct move available to him. It was to lower his arm, ask for the paper, and pick up the telephone. Ma'am, he said instead, I'm going to need you to step back from the door. She had not stepped forward. She stepped back anyway, 1 pace, precisely, and put her back against the cinder block again, and her right hand hung open and loose at her side. Salcedo watched her do it, and felt something go cold and quiet at the base of her skull, and she still could not have told anybody exactly what it was. At 0910, the range detail arrived, and the corridor got an audience. 2 sergeants and a staff sergeant, in for a Saturday qualification range, with a signed request and a stack of hand receipts and the good mood of men who are going to spend a day shooting instead of a day in an office. Their boots came up the corridor loud and easy. Quist, we're up. 22 rifles, 8 pistols. Give me 5, Staff Sergeant. The Staff Sergeant looked at the old woman against the wall, then at Quist's arm, then back. What's this? Visitor, Quist said. She's the Inspector General. It got the laugh he wanted. It got a bigger one than it deserved, because 3 men who are about to go to a range will laugh at almost anything. Careful, one of the sergeants said. Better square your key box away. Already been told about my key box, Quist said. Twice. More laughter. It went around the corridor and came back. Ma'am, you want a chair? The staff sergeant said. We got a chair in the orderly room. You've been standing a while. I'm all right, Billy Rask said. She's been standing there 20 minutes, Fitch said from the bench, and it came out flatter than he meant it to. Somebody called her Grandma. It was not cruel exactly, and the man who said it would not have been able to tell you afterward that he had said it, and it stuck for 4 minutes and was used 3 more times. She let all of it pass over her. There is a way of absorbing that kind of thing, which is not the same as enduring it. Enduring shows. Enduring has a jaw in it, and a swallow, and a moment where the eyes go somewhere else. The people who have endured a room will tell you afterward exactly how long it took. She did none of that. She stood in a corridor while 5 men made her the subject of the morning, and she was no more affected by it than a wall is affected by weather. And the only person who found that unsettling was the specialist at the workbench, because Fitch was 21 and had not yet learned that there are people in the world who have been spoken to by professionals. Quist told the range detail about the key control box a second time, with more detail, because it had worked once. She's been out there 15 minutes telling me how to run my room, he said. Next, she's going to tell me my racks are numbered wrong. Your racks are numbered correctly, Billy Rask said. Your placard's out of date by 4. Quist stopped. The authorized quantity on the placard is 182, she said. You've got 182 in the room. But the placard's dated November, and there's a memorandum on your wall from January that changed the authorization to 186. Somebody signed for 4 more and never updated the door. She still had not moved from the wall. "That's not a finding either, Sergeant. That's a printer." She had put her hands in her jacket pockets, which changed nothing about how she was standing, and she watched the hand receipts come across the counter, and while the men talked, she read the top sheet upside down at a distance of 9 feet. 22741, she said. To nobody. The staff sergeant stopped. "Say again." "The third one on your list. 22741. It's got a 2-digit transposition against the rack card." She said it as an observation about the weather. "You'll find it when you sign it out. It'll cost you 10 minutes at the counter and 40 on the range if nobody catches it now." The staff sergeant looked at his own sheet. Then he looked at the rack card taped to the cage door. Then he did not say anything for a moment, and the corridor's temperature changed again, in the way a room changes when the joke stops being free. "Quist," he said. "Check that." Quist checked it. It took him 90 seconds. He came back to the door, and he did not look at the old woman when he said it. "It's transposed. Fix it." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." The range detail took their weapons and went, and they were not laughing when they left, and 2 of them looked back down the corridor on the way out. Master Sergeant Salcedo had already gone. She had gone at the moment Rask said the serial number, quietly, back down the corridor and into the orderly room, and she had sat down at the terminal on the duty desk and pulled up the installation access system, and she had typed a name into it. She typed RASK, comma, W. Behind the laughter, on a Saturday morning, in a room with a wall clock and a coffee ring on the desk, a master sergeant was putting a name into a system that was about to refuse to answer her. If you have ever watched the young forget what the old once paid for the ground they are standing on, stay with this one. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault. Being corrected in front of a staff sergeant changed the shape of Sergeant Tyler Quist's morning. Up to that point, he had been a man managing a nuisance. After it, he was a man who had been made small in his own arms room by someone he had already decided was nobody. And there is only one direction a person goes from there unless somebody stops him. Nobody stopped him. "Ma'am." He came out of the cage and pulled the door to behind him, and it locked with a sound like a stapler. "You're going to come with me." "Where?" "Out. This is a restricted area under the physical security regulation. That's not me being difficult. That's the regulation. Unescorted personnel are removed and reported. I've asked you 3 times. "You've asked me once," she said. The other 2 were instructions. It was said mildly, and it was accurate. And it was, at that moment, the worst possible thing she could have said. And she knew it when she said it. And she said it anyway, because she had spent 25 years declining to be inaccurate. Quist took hold of her upper arm. He did it the way a young man does it when he has decided that touching somebody is procedure rather than aggression. 4 fingers and a thumb, above the elbow, through the sleeve of a red jacket, he turned her toward the exterior door and walked her 3 steps. She permitted it. That is the word for what she did. She did not resist, and she did not stiffen, and she did not pull. She went where the hand took her, and she did not look down at his hand, and she did not look at his face, and she went 3 steps and stopped moving. She did not stop by planting or bracing. She simply stopped, and his hand kept going for a 1/4 of a second, and then stopped too. And something about that 1/4 second told Quist's body a thing his mind had not yet agreed to. "Fitch," he said, "call the desk. Tell them we need the military police at 421. Fitch did not move. "Specialist." "Sergeant, she said there's a transfer at 1140. "There is no transfer." "She knew about the shim," Fitch said. The corridor was very quiet. Quist's hand was still on her arm. He had been holding a 69-year-old woman's arm for 11 seconds in a government building on a Saturday morning in front of a junior enlisted soldier. And there was a camera in the corner above the exterior door that had been recording continuously since it was installed in 2019, and everyone in the building knew the camera was there, including him. "Don't put your hands on a weapon you haven't cleared, Sergeant," Billy Rask said. She said it quietly. She said it in the flat, unhurried way she had said everything else that morning, as though it were another line item, and it took him 3 full seconds to understand that she had not said equipment. He let go of her arm. He could not have explained why. He would think about it for a long time afterward, on and off, for years, and the closest he would ever get was that she had said it the way his grandfather used to say things about the water at the quarry. Not a threat. A fact about the world, offered once, by somebody who had already watched it go wrong. "Get out," he said, and his voice was not as loud as it had been at 0840. "Just get out of my building." "I'll wait outside," she said. She walked to the exterior door without being escorted, and she opened it herself, and the daylight came in, flat and white across the polished concrete, and she went out and let it swing shut behind her. Through the reinforced glass, they could see her go down the 3 steps and stop at the bottom, and stand there in the parking area with her hands in her jacket pockets. She did not go to a car. That was the detail that stayed with Fitch. She did not go to a car, and she did not walk toward the gate, and she did not take out a phone. She stood at the bottom of the steps in a red jacket in the middle of an empty Saturday parking lot, facing the building, and she waited, the way a person waits for something that is already coming. "Sergeant," Fitch said, "don't." "Sergeant, I think we should call somebody." "I said don't." Fitch went back to the workbench and sat down and did not pick anything up. He was 6 months into his first unit. He had been raised to believe that a sergeant is a sergeant, and that the specialist's job is to be quiet and to learn. And both of those things are broadly true, and had served him well since October. But he had watched an old woman read a serial number upside down from 9 feet away, and he had watched her name the shim in position 11 without being able to see it, and he had watched her stop walking without bracing when a grown man had hold of her arm, and he had watched his sergeant put his hand on her in a corridor, under a camera. Fitch knew where that camera was. Everybody in the building knew where it was, because it was in the safety brief, and because the last armorer had put a strip of tape under it with the words, "Smile. Specialist," written on it in marker, and the tape was still there. He looked up at it now. Small black dome, ceiling corner, above the exterior door, recording continuously since 2019. It had a view of the entire corridor from the cage door to the exit, and it had been looking at the back of Sergeant Quist's head for the last 80 minutes. Whatever happened after today, that footage existed, and it would still exist next week, and it did not care who anybody was. That was the thought that finally moved him, and it took another 4 minutes to do it. In the orderly room, 40 feet away, Master Sergeant Ingrid Salcedo was looking at a screen that had just told her something impossible for the 3rd time. The installation access system does 4 things when you give it a name. It confirms the person exists, it returns their status, it returns any restriction, and it returns the sponsoring organization, every soldier, every civilian employee, every contractor, every dependent, every retiree with a commissary card, every vendor who delivers bread to the dining facility. If a human being has ever been cleared onto that installation, the system has a line about them. Salcedo typed the name and pressed return. The system returned nothing. Not access denied. Not restricted. Not no match found, which is what it says when you misspell something, and which she had seen 400 times. The result field came back empty, and the record count came back as 0, and the query log showed the search had completed successfully in under a second. She typed it again. Slower. 0. She tried the retiree database, which is a separate system with a separate login, and which contains every person who has drawn a retirement check from the Department of the Army since 1982. 0. Salcedo sat back in the chair. There is a difference between a person who is not in a system and a person who is not in a system on purpose, and after 19 years, She knew what the second one looked like, because it looks like nothing at all. Twice. She picked up the desk telephone and dialed the installation security manager at his home number, which she had used twice in 2 years, and which he had given her for exactly this reason. He answered on the 4th ring. She could hear a television. She told him what she had. She told him about the arms room, and the transfer, and the shim in position 11, and the key control log, and the woman standing in the parking lot in a red jacket. She told him the query came back empty on both systems. He asked her to say the name again. She said it. He asked her to spell it. She spelled it. And then the television went off at the other end of the line, and the man on the other end stopped being somebody she was interrupting on a Saturday and became somebody working. He told her to stay on the line. She heard a chair, a door, and then a long stretch of nothing but a house being quiet. 4 minutes. She counted them on the wall clock. When he came back, his voice had changed altitude. "Master Sergeant, where is she right now?" "Outside the building, in the lot." "Is anybody with her?" "No." "Is anybody keeping her outside the building?" Salcedo looked at the doorway. "Yes," she said. There was a silence on the line that she would remember for a long time. "Listen to me carefully," the security manager said. "I have made 1 phone call. I am going to make 2 more. The colonel is being notified right now, at home, and he is going to come in. I want you to go down that corridor, and I want you to stop whatever is happening, and I want you to do it before I hang up." "Sir, who is she?" "I don't know," he said. "That's the point. I put her name in, and the answer came back from somewhere above this installation, and what it says is that her access here is not something we grant. Do you understand what I just told you?" "No, sir. Neither do I, entirely. But I have been doing this for 26 years, Master Sergeant, and I have seen that answer come back exactly once before, and the last time I saw it, a 2-star came to my office to explain to me that I did not need to know." "Sir, what do I tell the sergeant?" "Tell him nothing. Do not explain anything to him, because you cannot, because neither of us knows anything. Tell him to step away from the door and stand where you can see him. And if he asks why," there was a short pause on the line, "Master Sergeant, in about 30 minutes, that young man is going to find out exactly why, in front of an audience, and he is going to remember it until he dies. Do not take that away from him by giving him a warning he did not earn." The line went dead. Salcedo sat for another 3 seconds, with her hand still on the phone. She had been in the Army since 2007. She had deployed twice. She had processed more access requests than she could count, and she had learned in 19 years that the institution she worked for was enormous and slow and made almost entirely of paper, and that almost nothing in it happened on a Saturday. An installation commander was currently driving in from a swim meet. She stood up. Salcedo put the phone down and went out of the orderly room at a pace that was not quite running. Quist was at the workbench with the rifle broken down in front of him and his hands not moving. "Sergeant," she said, "step away from that door." "Master Sergeant, she was an unescorted civilian in a restricted—" "Son!" Salcedo stopped in the middle of the corridor. "You have no idea who that is." Quist looked out through the reinforced glass at the small figure in the red jacket standing at the bottom of the steps in an empty parking lot, waiting for something that was already coming. And for the first time that morning, he was afraid of her, and he could not have said why. What the young sergeant in the pressed uniform did not know is what the next 40 minutes were about to teach him. Subscribe so you do not miss it. In February of 1991, Sergeant First Class Wilhelmina Rask was 34 years old, and she was lying under a net in the western Iraqi desert watching an empty road. There were 4 of them. They had come in at night on a helicopter with no lights, at an altitude that made the pilots earn their pay, and the aircraft had been on the ground for 11 seconds, and then it had gone, and the sound of it had gone with it. And after 90 seconds, there was no sound at all in any direction. People imagine the desert is hot. In February, at night, on the open ground west of the river, it was cold enough that the water in their tubes went thick, and the cold came up out of the ground through everything they had and kept coming. They walked 6 kilometers from the drop point, and then they dug. The hide was a scrape, 18 inches deep, longer than it was wide, spoil carried out in bags and scattered, a screen of desert-toned material over the top, with a horizontal slit at the front, no wider than a hand. It took 4 hours, and it had to be finished before first light, because after first light, every shovel of sand is a signal. Then they lay in it for 3 days. That is the part nobody puts in films. 3 days of not moving. You do not stand. You do not cook. You do not urinate outside the hide, so it goes into bags, and the bags stay with you. You watch a road in shifts through a glass with the objective shaded so it cannot flare, and you write down every vehicle that passes, and the point of all of it is that somewhere behind you there is an aircraft that will not be sent, unless somebody like you has actually seen the thing with actual eyes. They were looking for launchers, mobile ones, driven out at night, fired, and driven back under bridges before anybody could get to them. Everybody knew they were out there. Almost nobody had seen one. On the second night, they saw 2. Rask wrote the grid and the time and the count in a notebook the size of a playing card, in pencil, because pencil works when a pen has frozen, and Sergeant First Class Milo Petrosian sent it in a burst that lasted less than 3 seconds, and 40 minutes later, they lay in an 18-inch hole in the ground and felt the horizon shudder twice. Nobody cheered. There is no cheering in a hide. On the third afternoon, a dog found them. It was a herdsman's dog, and it was not looking for them, and it did not do anything dramatic. It stood 11 meters from the front slit and barked at the ground. Then a boy came to find out what the dog was barking at. He was perhaps 12 years old. He looked directly into the slit. Rask looked back at him. Neither of them moved for 2 full seconds, and then the boy turned and ran. And Petrosian said one word, and all 4 of them were up out of that hole and moving inside 90 seconds with everything they could carry, and the net still on the ground behind them. There is no clever ending to being seen. There is only the walking. They went south because south was where the pickup point was, and because west was where the engines were. They had 9 kilometers to cover, and about 4 hours of light left, and the ground between was flat, open, and gravel. At the 6-kilometer mark, Petrosian went down. He took a round through the left thigh, high, and the ground he went down on was hard and pale, and he did not shout, because men who have been trained the way he had been trained do not shout. Rask put a tourniquet on him in 40 seconds. Then she took his weapon, cleared it, slung it across her back with her own, and got him onto her shoulders. He weighed 181 pounds. She weighed 134. She carried him 3 kilometers. She did not do it in one movement. She did it in 90-meter stages, because 90 meters was what she could do before her legs stopped agreeing. And at the end of each 90 meters, she put him down and stood over him for 4 breaths and picked him up again. "You're not heavy," she told him, somewhere in the last kilometer, when he had started to argue with her. "You're not heavy. Keep talking. Tell me the names of your sisters." He told her the names of his sisters. He got to the third one twice. The other 2 did not reach the pickup point. That is the sentence. There is no expansion of it that makes it better, and no version of the story where it does not sit exactly there in the middle. And Billy Rask had carried it for 35 years and would carry it for whatever was left. At first light, a helicopter came in, low from the south into a shallow wadi, and put its wheels on the gravel, and 2 people got on it out of 4, and one of them was carried. The rifle came home. So did one man. Afterward, when the paperwork caught up, somebody in a building far away wrote a serial number onto a list, and the effect of that list was that the weapon Sergeant First Class Rask had carried across her back for 9 kilometers could never afterward be quietly turned in, quietly reissued, or quietly lost. The Army does not always know how to say thank you. Sometimes it says it in an accountability record, and means it. At 09:52, Sergeant Tyler Quist made the decision that could not be walked back. He had been standing at the workbench for 8 minutes, with a master sergeant in the corridor telling him to leave it alone, and every one of those 8 minutes had made the first sentence he had said that morning heavier. Because if the old woman in the parking lot was nobody, then he had removed a nuisance. And if she was somebody, then at 0840 he had put his arm across a door and told a stranger she could not handle what was behind it. And then he had put his hand on her arm, and there was a camera above the exterior door that had been running the entire time. There was one way to make the first version true. He pulled a blank statement form out of the drawer under the counter. "Sergeant," Salcedo said, "what are you doing?" "Documenting." "Documenting what?" "She made contact with the cage." He was writing. His handwriting was small and even, and he pressed hard. At approximately 0842, she placed her hand on the exterior mesh of the arms room cage. That's contact with a restricted area barrier by an unauthorized person. That's a security incident, and it gets a statement. She touched a fence, Sergeant. It's not a fence, Master Sergeant. It's a barrier, and there's a regulation about it. There was. He was quoting it more or less correctly. That was the terrible part. "Put the pen down," Salcedo said. He did not put the pen down. A person who has been wrong for 70 minutes and has been told so twice does not stop at minute 71, because stopping is a confession. He kept writing, because the statement was the only object in that building that could still make him write, and he was 24 years old. Then he went outside. Salcedo went after him, and Fitch went after Salcedo, and the 3 of them came down the concrete steps into the flat white light of a Saturday parking lot, and Billy Rask was standing exactly where she had been standing for 11 minutes. "Ma'am, I need a photograph of your lapel item for the statement." "My what?" "The pin." He had his phone out. "You're claiming a program affiliation. That's a claim. It gets documented." "Sergeant Quist," Salcedo said. He reached for the pin on her jacket. She let him. That is the thing Ronan Fitch would describe later in 3 separate conversations, and would never manage to describe well. She let him. She stood absolutely still with her hands in her jacket pockets, and let a 24-year-old sergeant reach across the space between them and take hold of a small, unmarked piece of metal on her left lapel. And in the half-second before his fingers closed on it, something in the old woman changed. She did not move. Her hands stayed in her pockets. Her feet did not shift. Her expression did not alter in any way that could be photographed. But every person in that parking lot felt the temperature drop, and Fitch took a step back without deciding to, and Salcedo's hand came halfway up, and Quist's own arm slowed by a fraction on its way in. For 1 second, the old woman was not still. She was ready. Then it was gone, and she was an old woman in a red jacket again, with her hands in her pockets, and the whole thing had lasted less time than it takes to read the sentence. "Sergeant." "Stop!" It was Fitch, 21 years old, 6 months in the unit, standing in a parking lot in front of his own sergeant with his voice cracking in the middle of the word. "Specialist, get back inside." "Sergeant, please stop." Quist's fingers closed on the pin. It came away from the jacket with a small, dry sound. The clutch fell into the gravel, and he didn't notice. He held it up to look at it. It was a plain, circular pin, about the diameter of a shirt button, brushed metal, no color, no motto, no eagle, no anchor, no wreath. It wasn't a unit crest, and it was not a decoration, and it was not anything he had ever been shown in 9 weeks of training or 2 years of practice. There was a number on the back. Quist stood in a parking lot on a Saturday morning holding a small, unmarked pin with a number on the back and no idea at all what he was holding. And at the far end of the lot, a plain sedan turned in off the access road at a speed that was not appropriate for a Saturday. And behind it came a second vehicle. And behind that came a truck from a service museum with the tailgate already unlatched. Colonel Barrett Ashcroft got out of the first vehicle in a polo shirt and khakis and boat shoes because it was Saturday, and he had been at his daughter's swim meet 40 minutes earlier, and he had a manila folder in his left hand. Installation commanders do not come to arms rooms. They do not come to arms rooms on weekends, and they do not come in civilian clothes, and they do not come at a walk that fast. Behind him came the security manager. Behind the security manager came a woman of about 55 in a cardigan, with a museum lanyard around her neck and a clipboard against her chest, and behind her, the truck was already backing toward the loading bay. Nobody had called the colonel. The system had called the colonel. He went past Quist, as though Quist were a bollard. "Sergeant Major," he said, and he stopped in front of the old woman in the red jacket, and he came to attention, in a polo shirt and boat shoes, in a parking lot. "I apologize. I was told at 0931. I have been driving since 0932. "It's all right, Colonel." "It is not, ma'am." He turned around. "Master Sergeant Salcedo." "Sir." "You made the call." "The security manager made the call, sir. I made the query." "Then you are the reason this is happening at 1000 and not at 1400, and I will remember that." He opened the folder. "Sergeant, what is your name?" "Sergeant Tyler Quist, sir." "Sir, I need to report a security—" "Stop talking." Quist stopped talking. Ashcroft read from the folder. He read it in a parking lot, out loud, at conversational volume, with 8 people standing in a rough half-circle, and he did not hurry any part of it. "Transfer authority, dated the 1st of April. Accountable item, 1 rifle, serial number listed, currently hand-receipted to the arms room of Building 421, Rack 4, Position 11. Release authorized to a service museum for permanent display. Transfer to be witnessed by a designated representative of the program of record." He turned the page. "Designated witness. Sergeant Major Wilhelmina Rask, United States Army, retired." The parking lot was very quiet. The truck's reverse alarm stopped. "Distinguished Service Cross," Ashcroft read. "Silver Star, Purple Heart. Western Iraq, February 1991. Something happened to Tyler Quist's face. It happened in stages, and everybody there watched it happen. First confusion, which is the mind trying to make a sentence fit into a shape it has already built. Then disbelief, which is the mind refusing. Then recognition, which is the mind giving up and letting the morning play again from the beginning at speed. And then the last one, which is not fear exactly, and which does not have a good name. "Sir," he said. "Sir, she didn't have a visitor badge. She's not on the access roster. I checked the roster." "You did," Ashcroft said. "The roster is mine. I approve every name on it, personally, every quarter." "Yes, sir. Her name is not on it, Sergeant, because her access to this installation is not granted by me." Ashcroft closed the folder. "I cannot put her on that roster. I am not the authority that puts her on anything. And I want you to understand the other half of that sentence, because it is the half that matters this morning." He waited. "It cannot be revoked by me either." Nobody moved. "There is a list," Ashcroft said, "that this installation is not read on. I am not read on it. My deputy is not read on it. When Master Sergeant Salcedo put that name into our system this morning, our system did not fail. Our system correctly told her that we do not hold that record, and then a person somewhere above this installation telephoned my security manager and told him to get me out of a swimming pool car park." He looked at the pin in Quist's hand. "Give that back to her, please." Quist looked down. He had forgotten he was holding it. He put it into her palm, and she closed her hand around it and put it in her jacket pocket. And she said, "Thank you." And she meant it. And that was somehow the worst moment of the entire morning for him. The curator came forward with her clipboard. Salcedo unlocked the cage. The racks stood in their rows under the fluorescent light, 182 of them, and the curator went to rack 4 and stopped at position 11. "Sergeant Quist," Ashcroft said, "come here." Quist came. "Position 11, Ashcroft said. "The one with the folded cleaning patch shimming the cradle. The one you clean twice a month because it is short and it does not sit right and it is easy to remember." "Yes, sir." "It's hers." Quist looked at the rifle in the rack. It was old. It had been in that position since 2017. He had put his hands on it 48 times. "It came out of the western Iraqi desert on her back," Ashcroft said, "over 9 kilometers, with a man on her shoulders. The reason it has a serial number on a special accountability list, Sergeant, is that the Army decided in 1991 that it was never going to let that particular rifle quietly disappear into a rack." The ventilation hummed. "And this morning," Ashcroft said, "you told her she couldn't handle it?" Colonel Ashcroft turned around in the corridor and began the sentence that ends a career. "Master Sergeant Salcedo, effective immediately. Sergeant Quist is relieved of arms room duties pending." "Colonel!" Billy Rask had not raised her voice all morning, and she did not raise it then. "Ma'am, don't take his arms room." Ashcroft stopped. In 26 years, he had heard a great many people ask for leniency on somebody else's behalf, and almost all of them had asked for it vaguely, in the way people ask when they want to have asked. "Ma'am, he laid hands on you." "He did," she said. "And he wrote a false statement. And he took something off my jacket in a car park in front of witnesses. I'm not asking you to pretend that didn't happen. I'm asking you not to take the one thing he's actually good at away from him at 24, because you will not get him back." "Then what would you have me do?" She looked at Quist for a moment. "Take his Saturday," she said. "I want him at the transfer. If you have ever known someone who carries what they did quietly and never once made you look at it, then honor them the way this old woman honored a boy who did not deserve it. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault and let her story find the people who need it." At 11:40 hours, the transfer took place in the loading bay of Building 421, and it took 19 minutes, because a transfer of an accountable weapon takes as long as it takes, and nobody was going to rush this one. The curator read the serial number aloud. Salcedo read it back off the rack card. Ashcroft verified. The hand receipt came off the clipboard, and the signature blocks were filled in order, in ballpoint, and Billy Rask signed the witness line in a small, clear hand that had not changed since 1975. Then the rifle came out of rack 4. It looked like nothing. That is the truth of it. It was a worn, short, unremarkable weapon with a scratched receiver and a stock that had been replaced at least once, and if you had put it in a rack of 182, you would never have found it again. Rask held it for about 4 seconds. She did not do anything with it. She did not shoulder it, or check it, or turn it over. She held it flat across both palms, the way you hold something that belongs to somebody else. And she looked at it, and then she turned around. "Sergeant Quist." He came forward. She put it into his hands. "Carry it to the vehicle." He looked at her. "2 hands," she said. "It's older than you are. The loading bay was 40 meters from the tailgate of the museum truck. Sergeant Tyler Quist carried that rifle across all 40 of them, in front of a colonel, a master sergeant, a specialist, a security manager, a museum curator, and the woman who had brought it out of a desert on her back before he was born. Nobody said anything for the whole 40 meters. It was the longest walk of his life. It would remain so. At the tailgate, the curator took it from him and laid it in a padded case and closed the lid. And Quist stepped back and put his hands behind his back because he did not know what else to do with them. "Sergeant." He turned. Billy Rask had taken the small unmarked pin out of her jacket pocket. She reached up and she pinned it, carefully, on the inside of his uniform blouse, on the left, where nobody would ever see it unless he opened his coat. "That doesn't mean anything," she said. "It's not a decoration, and it won't get you anywhere, and you can't wear it on the outside. It's just so that when you're 40, and somebody who looks like nobody comes to your counter, you remember there's a version of this where you were wrong." "Ma'am, I know," she said. "Don't. It gets easier if you don't say it in front of people." She got into a plain sedan and pulled out of the lot behind the museum truck, and she stopped at the gate the way everybody stops at the gate, and then she was gone. Afterward, Colonel Ashcroft asked Master Sergeant Salcedo how she had known. Salcedo thought about it. "She counted the racks through a closed cage, sir," she said. "And she stood with her back to a wall where she could see both doors, and she never once looked at the sergeant's hand when he had hold of her arm. I've only seen 4 people stand like that." "He's a boy," Ashcroft said after a while. "Yes, sir." She said that. "In the corridor, before you came out." He looked at the empty parking space. "She said he'll be a good one. He just met the wrong Saturday." Sergeant Tyler Quist went back inside at 12:21 and closed the key control box and signed the 14th of the month properly, both lines, and then he went into the cage and stood in front of rack 4 for a long time. Position 11 was empty. The folded cleaning patch was still there in the cradle, flattened into the shape of something that was no longer in it. He left the patch where it was. He worked that arms room for another 6 years, and he never lost a weapon. And he never once put his arm across that door again. And on the day he was promoted to staff sergeant, he stood in front of the mirror in his quarters and opened his blouse and looked at a small unmarked pin on the inside of it that nobody in the United States Army could identify. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.